So just to wrap up this section, I'll let everybody take a seat again. Wrapping up this section, two really common cases of misevaluating. We were talking about evaluation versus calculation. In chess, probably the biggest one is trading pieces, like amateurs. Really, amateurs all the way up to masters. Almost everyone is guilty of this sin, especially in blitz chess games, is trading pieces, or trade-itis, as I like to call it. People love to make trades in chess, whether or not they're good or bad. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll kind of evaluate until they prove that a trade is correct. I was teaching a group of girls a chess lesson in Philadelphia, part of this 9 Queens Academy that I do. And we did a team game, so half the class played against the other half. And the players had conferred and talked about their moves. And it was really interesting to watch because I was very happy. The girls were all like, yes, we should not use that bishop to take that knight because the bishop is pinning the knight and the bishop is slightly better in this position. So I was like, awesome. Perfect evaluation, right? And they went through this like 3 moves in a row. And then finally it was just like, let's just take that knight. Like, let's take the knight. And it's like, okay, everybody's like, yes, take the knight. And it's just so funny because it's like, wow, you guys totally knew that it was bad to do that, but you just can't resist the temptation. Because one of the nice things is when you take a piece, you know what your opponent's going to do, like 98% of the time they're going to recapture. And that's a soothing feeling in chess. And I think that's one of the reasons people do it. And in poker, I think something which reminds me of that is people, if they have like a good hand, like tens in the example we just looked at, it's kind of not that much fun to fold them because you don't really get hands as good as tens very often. So you might have like some slight bias when you're actually trying to evaluate towards calling. And I think in both cases, it's when you're actually evaluating, it feels like you're more trying to figure out why to do what you already want to do. So, and that can happen in all areas of life, but I've definitely noticed it in chess and poker most often with like these kinds of things. And yeah, I just want to talk a bit about confidence. People say that there's a lot of overconfidence in poker because otherwise the games wouldn't run. I think Will was just pointing that out because there's the rake. If there wasn't overconfidence, why would people agree to play in the games if they didn't think that they had some small edge, unless they're doing it purely for entertainment value? That being said, I still feel that confidence is an underrated ingredient to success in both chess and poker, and that it's generally much better to err on the side of confidence because if you're underconfident in the game, then if you make one mistake, you kind of like start obsess over that mistake instead of like thinking about what you're doing. And that's a really good section in that, in one of the books that I think there's a prize for in this class, The Mental Game of Poker. So if that kind of thing interests you and you don't win that prize, I recommend it. One clue, if you're erring on the side of underconfidence, would be like if you're extremely streaky. Like in chess, if you win 10 games in a row and then you lose 2 and you just keep losing, because that would be like a natural explanation for why you're playing really well when you're winning. You need that confidence all the time, and then maybe you're going to win a much higher percentage. Okay, now I'm going to kind of switch gears and like talk more about a little bit of a quick intro to image in online poker. There's so many important things to talk about regarding this topic in live poker, because in live poker you get so many clues about your opponent. I know some of your I was listening to the lecture that Matt Harlenko gave, and he was talking about how it's really important not to overestimate image, because then you could end up really screwing yourself. So it's definitely a complicated topic. But in chess, generally this whole thing is not very important. I mean, the only thing that image, like if you know who your opponent is, it's mostly going to affect the opening choice. And then it's also going to affect draw offers. A draw offer in chess is your opponent at any point in the game. There's this rule that they can just like say, do you want to make the game a draw? And that is, it's very relevant who your opponent is. Usually if it's a strong opponent, people are more likely to take it. If it's a lower rated or weak opponent, people aren't going to take it. But in poker, monitoring your own image and that of other players is a huge part of the game, even in online poker when you can't see them. So what do you think are some things that you can figure out about your opponent online when you don't have the pleasure of actually seeing the people, or the displeasure in some cases? Now, in your tournaments online, do you know who everyone is? Or is it some of the time because you're friends with them and you exchange screen names, but not always? Okay. So like saying, assuming that you don't know who the person is, like what might you glean online? It's probably very different because you guys all know that you're students at MIT, but what are a couple other things? Yeah?
Well, sometimes if they're like multi-tabling, they'll have like the auto fold button.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could win that, fold or like little things like that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about, actually. Yeah, absolutely. If you can kind of notice that they're multi-tabling, then you can definitely take advantage of that. On one hand, it probably suggests in many cases that they're a strong player because they want to like play a lot of tables and maximize value, but it also shows that they might not be able to pay really good attention to the game that you're playing if you're only playing one table. That's good. Anything else? They might apply not to the game you're playing because you know everybody goes to MIT and is part of this class, but might apply to like other online sites that hopefully we'll be able to play in more of in the US soon. Yeah? Yeah. The typical things, like you actually just watch them play and see what they're doing. Yeah. That's definitely probably the most important thing. And a lot of sites you can also see where the player's from. You can actually even like Google their screen name or look it up in certain sites and find out like how much they usually buy in for, how much they've won in poker. There's a lot of stuff you can do like that, which gives you like really detailed information. I put up some other things too that some people do. You can sort of glean some things just from their screen name, although probably looking up their screen name is going to be the most important thing. For instance, most people who didn't know much about poker wouldn't guess that OMG Clay Aiken is one of the most winning players. But that's Phil Galfond, yeah. I don't know what in Will's is Cutie Pie, right? Cutie Pie 314, right? So a lot of times you can't judge that much from the actual screen name. Another person who I was teaching chess to, he was like, "Why are there so many hot girls on this online chess site?" Because he didn't realize that people just like to use hot girls as their avatars. And I was like, "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the male to female ratio in chess has not changed that much overnight." So there's not much that you can glean from that, but maybe something. Country of origin can be big. There's certain traits that people might display from certain countries more than others. This is a really big one. Like a lot of sites, you can install something called a HUD, where you actually can like get stats on the players. If you're playing a lot of tables, you don't actually have time to pay attention. I mean, this is really important in cash games, especially when the blinds are staying the same. But most people use it in tournaments too. Some people will show cards in chat. Timing is kind of a big one. Like if people like continually take a long time, maybe it means that they're multi-tabling. Even if you feel like they have a stable internet connection and they're exhibiting timing differentials based on the strength of their hand, you might be able to notice that. Most websites you can take notes, and then the number of tables, which was already mentioned. And yeah, I wanted to show one example of that, of taking advantage of that. This is it's a fun site to play on, but since we can't really play on PokerStars in the United States anymore for real money, this is one of the few sites that you can play online. It's called Bovada, and it's interesting because they take away a lot of the things I just mentioned by everybody has like a number. It's anonymous poker, and I think one of the reasons the site decided to do this, I mean, can you think of a reason? Why would they want to take out like the avatar and the screen name? Doesn't that seem like part of the fun? Yeah, takeaway tracking. That's like a really big one because they thought that amateurs were getting too abused in online poker, and that like people would even come into the chat, usually not professional, like would do this because they would realize it would be like bad for their win rate or tapping the glass. But there would be people who would come in like Google a search name, and embarrass a person and say like, "Hey, you lost X amount of dollars," and obviously that's not something that people want to know. Like nobody would want to go to their live casino, because almost everybody who plays at a casino live in all the other games would want it to be like on their forehead, like how much they won or lost. So that was like one of the ideas, but obviously there are a lot of negatives to it. Like it could also be a lot less fun for the amateurs because now they don't have to get their avatar and their screen name attached to themselves. So, but to point out like one specific thing that you can do to exploit people who you think are like multi-playing or distracted is, instead of going all in when you have that less than 15 big blind stack that will recommends you to start pushing instead of doing anything else. You can like leave yourself a few chips behind. You see this really frequently. Do you guys see it in your tournaments at all? Is anyone doing this? Is anybody going like, instead of just like making it 8 big blinds, they'll make it like 7.6, hoping that you don't notice that they have so few big blinds? Obviously, the fewer it goes down, the more detrimental it is. Like if you only have 3 big blinds and you make it 2.5 and then the big blind folds, and you know, they should basically never be folding. That's a big bonanza for the person who did that. So did anybody see that in their own games here in PokerStars? Okay, so it's like something that you can do if you think people aren't paying attention. I actually put here are the benefits of it. People might not pay attention and fold. In general, I think like when all things being equal, it's probably better to confuse people in poker. I feel like when people are confused, they're more likely to do something that's a mistake, one way or the other. And then it might get called by 2 players and checked down, and then you're left with like very few chips, which when you have very few chips in poker, it's always going to be better than having 0, because the fewer chips you have, the more valuable they are. And then if you're close to a pay jump, it might stall you into it. That's a really, really ethically debatable thing, and that's something actually that Anonymous Poker, probably the people who came up with the thing in Bovada, didn't realize how detrimental this was going to be, that stalling is a huge epidemic in the Bovada, because nobody can attach your number to a name or an avatar, so you're not embarrassed to just like, as soon as you think it's even like marginally profitable to just like stall and like get into the money or get into a pay jump, people will just do it, and it's like really horrible for the game. But I guess that's just kind of a negative, but it could be a positive in certain instances. But then of course there are the costs of doing that, and the biggest one is chances of disconnection or misclicking, and how much you hate life if you put in like 7.9 big blinds and then like suddenly like the internet goes off and you end up folding when the person like puts you all in, and then you have like the 0.1 big blind. That's pretty bad, and of course it can happen like enough so that sometimes people just don't do that, especially if they're playing a lot of tables. And then another consideration with that is that it slows down the game. And if you're a good player, you kind of want the game to go quickly, right? Because the more hands you get, the better it should be for you, theoretically. So that's on the other side of it. And like I said, and also possibility of decreased fold equity. Like if you do have, a lot of people might think like, oh, if you did have aces or kings, you wouldn't try to make your stack look bigger than it is. So maybe they're going to be even more likely to call with certain hands, which is not usually what you want when you're making the play. So that could be a negative as well. So it's a little cost-benefit analysis of that move if you see it. So yeah, this I already kind of talked about a lot, like why I'm number 169 on Bovada. Your number changes every time on that site. You just get a new number every time, and I put some of the pros and cons that players may feel more comfortable. Maybe they don't even want to play good poker. Maybe they just want to like go all in blind, and they don't want people to make fun of them. So that's definitely a positive, because you want people like that playing poker, right? You don't want to make fun of them and tell them to leave, right? And on the other hand, players might have less fun. And another negative, players might be abusive and stall more. So it's kind of like this game theory thing that if people start stalling all the time, eventually the game is just going to be destroyed, because it's going to slow to a crawl, and you're just going to be like paying money to rake and flipping coins, right? And actually, you do start to see that effect a little bit on Bovada. It's kind of interesting to see how something that, almost like a ethical thing, like what happens if you just leave a cash box open and leave the room, like how many people will take from it if no one's looking. And I think that you start to see that effect, that it destroys things. Not completely, but to some extent. And now I want to talk a little bit about the final subject of the day. Got like another 20 minutes, and I want to leave some time for questions. I want to talk about being a woman in chess and poker. It's kind of a question I get a lot, because I've written books on the topic, and I teach women's chess classes, and I write about women in poker for Stars. So it's definitely something I've done a lot of thinking about, like the pros and cons and some of the issues around it. First, I want to show a few example images. This is a little chess match that I played once. Pretty typical. This is a little still from a video clip that I'm going to show you later. And I guess for some women, this is what it might feel like to play in poker tournaments, surrounded by beasts. And this is the famous Garry Kasparov, who I said is very expressive. You can see even in this one, even in this game, he's just playing a simultaneous exhibition. Simultaneous exhibition is where you play many different people at once. In chess, it's usually a way that you can do a promotion, like somebody like Garry Kasparov, instead of just playing one person in a promotion, can now play like 30 or 40 children. In this case, he's playing a very talented young woman, Rochelle Ballantyne, who's actually a star in a recent movie which had a pretty wide release. It's called Brooklyn Castle. Anybody see it in the room? No one saw it? You might want to take a look for it. Anyway, she's one of the stars of this, and probably she's going to Stanford next year, and she has a good chance of being the first African-American chess master who's female. So hopefully she gets that done. And this is actually another picture of like a woman just surrounded by men. But it's actually also a women's world chess champion, one of the top women chess players in history. Anybody know who it is? She's pretty famous. Like, she's been in a lot of mainstream media, Vogue. She does a lot of modeling. CNN. Not Susan Polgar, no. No, not Judith Polgar. Judith Polgar is the strongest female chess player in history, but it's not her. No, it's actually Alexandra Kostyniuk. She is a grandmaster and a women's world champion, and she also does like a lot of cool promotional stuff. And then I want to show one more. This is actually a professional poker player. It's a friend of mine, Katie Dozier, and she's multi-tabling here. So in this case, I guess her gender really matters very little. But so in some cases, you know, being a woman in games actually has no relevance at all, and that's why a lot of women really like playing online, because maybe they didn't like the attention of playing live. And now I'll just show you a little chart I made of pros and cons here about being a woman in games. Well, one of the great things about being a female in games is that there's a lot of special tournaments, prestigious, promotional, often even profitable tournaments that are exclusive to women. In poker, you've got, in almost every series, there's a women's or ladies event that is often technically open to men, but it's usually looked down upon. Usually those guys don't get very many dates from playing in the tournament. But actually, they often get heckled, and people even put bounties on their heads. I don't like that, though. I don't think that you should put a bounty. If you're playing in an all-women's tournament and a man plays, I don't think you should put a bounty on his head. Because what do you think the overall effect of putting a bounty on someone's head will be? Like, say there's a 1,000-player tournament, and you put, like, a very expensive bounty on one player.
Then they're going to get cold more when they go all in.
So they might, what might happen? They might get a... Yes, exactly. Very good. They might get they're going to get knocked out a lot. They're going to get knocked out a lot and just like not have any chips at all. But some of the time they're going to get a lot of chips because people are going to call on them to get this awesome bounty. And then they might actually win the tournament, which is a complete disaster. Like you'd much rather have this guy just cash and like, you know, win like $500, you know, plus his buy-in than have him actually have like the bracelet for the World Series of Poker. So no bounties for these guys. They should just be ignored. But there's also a lot of, you know, external opportunities for sponsorship. Like a lot of people say they're very jealous of women who play games like poker and chess because they feel like it's easier for them to make a name for themselves, which is certainly true. I mean, I think that would be true in anything where you're a minority and there's not a lot of people like you. You're going to get more attention and therefore maybe get more opportunities. Another pro that people point out a lot is, you know, maybe you're going to be underestimated or avoided in ways that are profitable for you at the table. Like people might think that you're extremely tight, so they might fold to you more often. They might tell you what they have more often and being truthful about it. Like, these are probably true a lot of the time, especially in tournaments. I think a lot of women actually gravitate, a lot of talented female poker players, they gravitate towards tournaments for a lot of these reasons. Because in tournaments, that's where you get most of the attention. If you win, you get a lot of attention. And it's also, if you have increased fold equity because people are afraid of you, that's also really good in tournaments because it's more important to win. It's more important to not lose chips than to win them. Whereas in a cash game, that effect wouldn't be so pronounced because, you know, you really want to get paid off a lot. And so if people are folding to you, they're also not paying you off as much. So it works both ways. And you can see that on the con side. Like, I remember in one cash game that I was playing, there was this guy who was definitely an amateur, and like people at the table weren't being that nice to him because he was stacking his chips in really weird ways. But he would just play every single hand, and he would call every single raise, and like I just started being nice to him because I was like, this is great. We want this guy in the game, and so you know when I raised him, he would fold. I was the only person he folded to. I was like, what? So it's actually, people point out the pros a lot, but there are some cons too. But again, like I said, I think women sometimes gravitate towards tournaments in poker because of that. And then another thing that people might like is women might like the attention that they get when they play in poker and chess tournaments. Like a lot of people talking to you, crowding around, looking at your game. You know, like if you play a great game, people are more likely to come up to you and say, awesome job. And who doesn't want that, right? Some people don't. And yeah, that's another thing. If you are successful, people will really celebrate you a lot. And then here's the negatives, which are also there. A lot of women have trouble, for instance, sharing expenses to go to hotels. You know, both chess and poker are very expensive if you're playing in live tournaments. You have to pay for the hotel and the travel costs, and I think it's a lot less expensive for men to do that because they can share expenses, and there's a much bigger pool of people who would probably be attending the same tournaments. And then a lot of women really hate the attention that comes with it as well. And I would advise people who don't like a lot of attention, who are female and want to play games, you know, you also probably want to try online. And that comes to my final point, that I think for women players in both chess and poker, it's true that if you make like a really good move or play a beautiful game, people are going to be like, wow, you're awesome. But they're also going to make fun of you more if you play badly. So it's just like almost like a magnifying effect. Like everything good that you do is greater and everything bad you do is worse. Seems that way from my experience, at least. I don't know if anybody else has any experience that they would like to add to that. But like, I guess one example of that is when I play in a lot of tournaments, you know, there's such a small sample size for the first couple orbits, but I noticed that, you know, if I win a couple hands early on, I play aggressively, people will be like, wow, you know, that's so awesome, like, you're so good. Like, even at the World Series of Poker main event this year, like, I played, like, some really random, stupid hand where I just, like, raised pre-flop, and then I, like, c-bet, and everyone folded, and, like, they were like, wow, that was a great hand. I was like, yeah. Yeah, I'm really proud of that one, you know? And whereas, like, if you do something that's bad, I think people will also magnify it. Like, wow, like, you're really the target at the table. Like, if you play one hand badly or even just get unlucky and don't win the hand, people will really, like, tend to target you more. So, kind of interesting. Yeah?
I have a question. Can you use that to your advantage? Like, the first hand of the table, you just play something really bad and then try and exploit the fact that they all pay attention to that? Does that work better for people?
I think maybe, like, I feel like there's a stage where people, like, maybe, I think people are starting to change, but there's definitely a stage where people are like, wow, like, if you're, like, 4Xing in this tournament, like, you're probably a really bad player. Like, say you're making it, the blinds start at 50, 100, and you make it, like, 450 or something. That must mean that you suck, even though, like, you have, like, 200 big blinds. So you maybe could do that, and then people are like, wow, like, this must be her first tournament because she's making, like, such a large raise, or, like, she must, like, have never studied any, you know, poker or played online ever. So that would be an example of something that might be, like, very, very marginally unprofitable, if at all unprofitable, but people might think that you're bad because of it, and that could be profitable later. Okay, now I wanted to just, like, go to the, oh, it's starting already. I wanted to go, this is, like, the most famous poker, one of the most famous poker expressions. It's all one long session. What does that refer to? Yeah, it's kind of, I guess what it's trying to give, what point do you think it's trying to make about how you should approach poker? Like, what should you not do? Starts with an R. No, it's, you shouldn't be, like, results oriented, you know, like, if you lose your aces versus kings, you shouldn't say, oh, I should never have raised with aces. Such a terrible play. You know, you should think about what's going to happen in the long run with your hands, and the fact that you might be playing poker for a long time, and, you know, all of your good decisions are going to balance out with your bad ones. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant to say. That, like, when you make your good decisions and you get unlucky, that's going to still be good in the long run for you. So you shouldn't think about it as like, oh, I had a terrible session today, I must have done something wrong, but rather look at your results and think about how that will contribute to the long session, which is your life. And that has some similarities in this little video that I made. I can play it here? Yeah.
You can play here. You can make it bigger.
Okay. How do I do that?
You just alt tab it because it goes to the player.
Okay.
If you just alt tab it.
Oh, gotcha. This one. All right. Oh. There, I got it now. Okay. Oh, okay. Can't find. Got it. And the reason I show you that video to illustrate the long session point is because, you know, at the beginning of the video you saw that she changed from younger to older, and that is meaningful because the story of Goldilocks was originally featuring an older woman, and just kind of as the story got retold and made into a children's tale, she became very young and blonde. So it just kind of reminded me of how in poker you can play for so many years, and because poker is so consuming, you can kind of just like get older playing and like not even realize it, and that's why it's so important to think of the game as a long session. So yeah, questions about anything I talked about? I know I talked about kind of a wide variety of things today, so anything at all? Yeah?
So something you thought about this a lot. What do you think about the title of Women's Grandmaster?
Oh yeah, I've written a lot of things about that. There's a title called Women's Grandmaster, and it's distinct from the Grandmaster title. I think it's I don't think it's great. I don't really like the title Women's Grandmaster. I think it's a bit confusing because nowadays there's almost 20 women, I think it's maybe 16 last time I counted, who have the regular Grandmaster title, which requires more qualifications. Now maybe 20 years ago when there was no women who had the regular Grandmaster title, it had some kind of purpose, whereas now I think it's more confusing because of exactly that reason. And what you often find is that a talented female player will start out winning the women's Grandmaster title, and people will be like, awesome, and then she might reach the regular Grandmaster title, and it was like, well, I thought you were already a Grandmaster, even though the second one is such a much more significant achievement. So I don't think it's great, but that being said, I really do approve of women's tournaments, because I don't think it's really the same thing. A women's tournament, I think, doesn't necessarily have to be seen as an inferior tournament. It could be more seen as a bonding experience for women, because normally they're just playing against men. So here they get to meet more women. It might, you know, provide some role models for younger girls. So I'm okay with women's tournaments, but I do think that the women's Grandmaster title should probably be phased out at some point. Yeah?
When did you decide to make the transition from chess to poker, and how big of a part does sort of poker play in your life now as opposed to chess?
The reason, the question is, you know, when I transitioned to poker, probably the reason is so many of my friends who played chess switched to poker, and most importantly my brother, because he became a professional poker player, and he taught me originally how to play like sit and goes, and yeah, that I just found it very interesting. And chess, even though I really love it and I think it's a beautiful deep game, at some point it was just interesting to be introduced to another game in another subculture. And nowadays, I really spend probably pretty similar times in both because I still do tons of chess coaching and a lot of writing, like the 2 books that I did, and just so many projects around chess. I made a chess TV show last year with a bunch of talented players from all over the country. So I like being in 2 worlds at once because it keeps things more interesting. Any more questions? Yeah?
I was telling one of my friends that at the French championships, they had so many male players trying to enter the females-only tournament, and they weren't allowed to keep them out of the tournament.
Is poker or chess?
Poker.
Uh-huh.
That they decided to hold a male-only tournament as well.
Yeah.
They had a male-only tournament and a female-only tournament the same day. You know, anyone was allowed to enter either tournament. How do you feel about that solution?
A male-only tournament to kind of balance out the female-only tournament. I think that's a decent solution. It's kind of funny, but but if either is allowed to enter either, then you would think that eventually it would just end up being like 2 regular poker tournaments, one with a smaller field.
There's also legal things, like if they have one for each, they might be able to restrict them.
Yeah, if you can restrict them, I don't mind. The only problem with that, and then you could have like a heads-up championship between the 2. I've heard people talk about that, but the problem with that would be that the women's tournament would be so much smaller. Like if you did that, for instance, at the World Series, like you had the World Series of Poker ladies event 1K at the same day as a men restricted 1K. The men restricted 1K would be much bigger, probably like 5 times bigger. So you'd kind of have some difficulties there having a heads-up championship between the 2. I think it would be very profitable for the women's side because they have a much bigger chance of winning first place. So yeah, let's do that. Good idea. See, maybe some men won't play just because of that. I don't know. Yeah? You had a question?
I was going to ask, how would you estimate the percentage of hands someone plays? Because usually they're not going to play, they're going to play around, like they're going to, in total, it's going to be around 10 rounds or 15 rounds, and that's not a good estimate on how much percentage of hand they go all in.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I guess it's hard to estimate, like, if you haven't played with somebody for a long time, you know, what their ranges are. But especially because if you only have, like, a small sample size, like, you're playing just one tournament with them. But I guess you can just look at their cards and see what hands are playing from different positions and how that compares to, like, equilibrium. And if it seems like they're playing a range that's pretty wide from this position, you can assume that they're playing, like, a similar range equilibrium from the other positions. That would be my big advice, but it's a big, good question. Yeah?
On average, how would you compare like the amount of time and effort that you need to start becoming profitable in poker? With, I mean, how much is it like the equivalent of becoming an expert in chess or like an A player in chess?
So it's pretty hard to answer. I think it changes a lot with the different dynamics of, you know, online poker and whatnot. Like maybe before when people could play on Poker Stars and Full Tilt when they were in America, it would probably be like way easier to be profitable in poker. But now that you can't play on those sites, you would actually have to like relocate as American to play. So that would make it like really hard to be profitable if you include the relocation expenses in the amount you have to be profitable by, right? And then live poker, it's pretty hard. What's that? Then it should be easier in poker. It should be to be an expert. It's pretty hard as an adult. Like if you had chess background before, getting to an expert might not be that hard. But like say you're like 22 and you've never studied a move of chess, I think it's pretty difficult to be an expert at that point, especially if you have any sort of life, you know, where. Yeah, I think it's pretty difficult. I mean, maybe if you have a lot of experience in another game, because the. Yeah. I think that would be hard, but it depends. I mean, people who go to MIT are obviously like much smarter than the average person. I don't know if you guys would argue with me on that, but so maybe it would be different. But I think it's a question that people raise a lot, like how easy is it to make an average adult a chess master, and you know you don't see it very often.